Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story, directed by Jake Kasdan, stars John C. Reilly and Jenna Fisher. It's a comedy that parodies music biopics, the movies describing the lives of musicians, rock stars that typically follow the same story beats. This film goes through all of those story beats and laughs at them pretty hard. But it's not just laughing at other movies, it's also a pastiche of popular music itself, the music industry, and even specific musicians. Some of the ones directly parodied here are Johnny Cash, Elvis Presley, and the Beatles. So we open with the fictional rock star Dewey Cox preparing to go out for one last show in his career. And as he's standing backstage, he remembers all of his life before that, and then we get to see it from the early childhood and first experiences with music, through rocky beginnings of a musical career, then the sudden fame and the vices that came with it, sex, drugs, parties, and then all the other familiar stages of a rock star's career. Put it like this: if you've ever seen any biopic of any musician ever, you will recognize a lot of the plot in here. Walk Hard seems to be the movie that asks the question, wait, don't all these stories seem sort of the same? And then by doing a pastiche of it, it shows that yes, that is indeed the case. And like a lot of pastiches, the more of the things it spoofs you're familiar with, the funnier it will be. I think if you live under the rock and you have never seen any rockstar life story, then it may not be as entertaining. For me, it was. I have to say, I had a good time watching it. It's cleverly written and most of the humor lands. Also, I think it worked for me because I'm quite interested in music in general, so I was able to identify very easily what the joke was about in most scenarios. And for that reason, the things that were funniest to me were probably the cameos. Elvis Presley is played by Jack White, and when the Beatles show up, Jack Black is Paul McCartney and Paul Rudd is John Lennon, and believe me, it is hilarious. There's also a whole section where Dewey Cox becomes a copy of Bob Dylan, and that was just hysterical. The whole extended sequence had me in stitches. The film is also quite well done, technically speaking, and that goes, for the music. But I was also particularly impressed with the costumes and the set design. As we go through the different decades and stages of Dewey's career, the style of music and the clothes and everything around that evolves as well. And I thought that was really well done to the point that it stood out to me as something, noticeably great. But it isn't all rainbows, I'm afraid. I do have a bit of criticism as well. And as I was watching the film, I suddenly remembered a video essay I saw on YouTube some time ago, which discussed comedy in American movies in recent years. And that essay pointed out how American comedies have largely devolved, sadly, into relying purely on dialogue. You will often have a scene where two characters are standing opposite one another, shouting funny lines at each other. But apart from that, nothing really happens in the scene. The characters themselves don't move too much, there's nothing going on in the background. The movie, which is a visual art form, is not utilizing the image at all. It might as well be an audiobook. And even when there are instances of physical comedy, someone falling over, funny clothes or looks, it will again be in isolation. So you either have a scene with visual humor or a scene with funny dialogue, but rarely both. And that was contrasted with older movies like Airplane or Naked Gun or Monty Python, but also with recent stuff from Edgar Wright. Even if you have a scene with, where the funny dialogue is supposed to be on the foreground, be the most important thing, you still almost always have something else going on in the frame, enhancing the humor or finding it elsewhere at the same time. And I think Walk Hard is a painful example of just that criticism, a textbook example, I would say, where different styles of comedy do not mix, and in general, the visual side of things is underutilized and at times even forgotten. There were many scenes where I thought to myself, you know what, this isn't bad, but it's kind of boring. I mean, you could have had this particular thing happen in the background at the same time, or move the camera differently for comedic effect. Like, specific ideas came to my mind on how to improve what I was seeing. And that to me is a sign that the movie misses the mark of being really great, because when the cracks are that obvious and it's so easy to identify what you can do specifically to improve the film, and with that in mind, Walk Hard ends up still being a decent, enjoyable comedy. I wasn't, completely, it wasn't a wasted time, but it could have been so much more.